Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming back to the Love and Betrayal channel. Today, I have a new and quite interesting story to share with you. The day she locked the door. I never thought my wife would choose the dog over me. Not after everything we'd built, not after 10 years of marriage, not after I gave her a home, a name, a life people envied. But on that cold January morning, when I returned with guilt heavy in my chest and a suitcase in my hand, she opened the door, looked at me, then said without yeah, then said, without a flicker of hesitation, "You can go, he stays." And she meant the dog, not me. I stood there frozen, the wind slicing across the back of my neck, as Milo, the golden retriever I once called a furball waste of space, sat behind her with calm, steady eyes. His tail didn't wag, he didn't bark, he just watched. Like he knew, like he'd been waiting for this. Let me rewind. 3 months earlier, I made a mistake. A stupid, selfish, devastating mistake. Her name was Emily. Young, exciting, the kind of woman who laughed at all my jokes and didn't ask me to take out the trash. We met during a conference trip. One night became two, then messages, then weekends. I told myself it was temporary, that I'd stop, that I loved my wife, Rachel, and this was just an escape from the monotony. But secrets rot, and lies stink worse than dog hair on a clean couch. Rachel found out. I came home from work one evening and Milo didn't greet me like usual. He always ran to the door when I entered. Rachel had trained him that way, said it was his welcome home duty. But that night, silence. The house was too quiet. Rachel sat on the couch holding her phone. "Whose lipstick is this?" she asked, holding up a stained napkin from my gym bag. I froze. The air went heavy. And Milo, from across the room, growled softly. Rachel didn't yell. She didn't cry. She just said, "Pack your things." And I did. I thought she'd call after me. I thought she'd miss me. I thought I could fix it. I was wrong. 3 months passed, and Emily turned out to be exactly what I feared. Shallow, demanding, bored quickly. She left after I confessed I'd never really planned to divorce Rachel. So I stood alone, and I missed everything I used to take for granted. The smell of coffee in the morning, Rachel's laugh at dumb documentaries, the way she always whispered good night twice. Even Milo, who I once swore was shedding on purpose just to spite me. I missed them. So I went back, tail between my legs, apologies rehearsed, suitcase in hand. And that's when she opened the door and chose the dog. "You're not serious," I said, stunned. "Rachel, it's a dog." She blinked slowly, then replied, "No, Jacob, he's not just a dog. He's the only one in this house who never lied to me, who never left, who never treated my love like an option." My throat tightened. She continued, her voice calm but cold. "While you were sneaking around, he was sleeping by the door every night. When I cried, he laid his head on my lap. When I stopped eating, he brought his food bowl to me. He stayed." I looked past her. Milo stared right back. Still calm, still there. My stomach twisted. "I made a mistake," I said. "Please, I just want to come home." Rachel shook her head. "You already did, and you made your choice. She pointed at the doorway. "This is me making mine." I wanted to scream, beg, say that a dog couldn't take my place. But somehow, I already knew he had. Not out of vengeance, but out of quiet, unwavering presence. I left, the suitcase still in this suitcase still in my hand, the apology stuck in my throat, and behind the closed door, Milo stood at the window, not gloating, not angry, just watching, like he knew what Rachel hadn't said out loud. He stayed when you didn't, so why should I trust you now? That night, I sat in a motel room staring at the ceiling, haunted by the silence of a home I once took for granted. And for the first time, I realized Rachel hadn't chosen the dog instead of me. She chose him because of me. Because where I betrayed her, Milo remained loyal. Where I lied, he stayed honest. Where I broke her, he laid beside the broken pieces and never moved. I used to think love was about grand gestures, about money, flowers, and passion. But Rachel knew better. She saw love in constancy, in little things, in warm fur on cold nights, and the quiet breath of someone who never walks out the door. And now, as I sit alone, I wonder, was it ever even a choice? Or had Milo always been the one who truly knew how to love her? ChatGPT said, "Toilian KN, Yuchung kum tiptuk part 2 ko series, she chose the dog over me, and now I understand why. Voitiu day. Part 2, the things I didn't know he did. I used to think Milo was just background noise. Another responsibility, another thing shedding on the furniture and barking at the mailman. But after Rachel shut the door on me and kept Milo, I couldn't stop thinking about them. Together, her soft hands brushing his golden fur, him curling up beside her when the world felt too heavy. That silent bond between them I never truly saw until it was too late. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized I hadn't just lost a wife. I'd lost the one soul in our home who knew how to stay when everything else fell apart. A few days after she kicked me out, I got a message from Rachel's sister, Sophie. She was blunt as ever. "You heard her, she's not coming back. But you should know Milo saved her." That line haunted me. Milo saved her. How? I called Sophie. She didn't have to pick up, but she did, probably just to give me a piece of her mind. I asked her gently, "What did you mean when you said he saved her?" She went quiet, then sighed, and told me the truth I'd never bothered to learn. "You know that week after she found out," Sophie said, "she didn't talk to anyone, barely ate. I checked on her and she looked like a ghost." I swallowed hard. She didn't want help, but Milo, he never left her side. Sophie's voice softened. He slept outside her bedroom door even when she locked herself in. He whined softly until she came out. He refused to eat until she did. He even brought her your sock once, like he was trying to remind her of the parts of you that weren't broken. I closed my eyes, shame pressing down on my chest. I never knew. I never saw. And Sophie continued, came the night she almost didn't wake up. My heart stopped, and what do you mean? She took too many sleeping pills, not on purpose, at least that's what she says. She was exhausted, barely functioning, wanted to rest. My voice cracked. Is she okay? She is, because of Milo. Sophie paused. He barked, loud, nonstop, scratched her door so hard he broke a claw. The neighbor called me. I found her barely breathing. That dog saved her life. I couldn't speak. Tears blurred the edges of my vision. Sophie's voice turned sharp again. So the next time you think she chose a dog over you, remember, you broke her. He picked up the pieces. She hung up. And I just sat there in that motel room, the walls closing in with every breath. I started remembering things differently, moments I used to roll my eyes at. Milo lying outside the bathroom door when Rachel was sick. Milo staring at me when I raised my voice during arguments. Milo whining and pushing his nose into Rachel's hand when she looked tired or quiet. I thought he was just being needy. Turns out, he was watching her break before I ever noticed. And while I was busy escaping into lies, he was standing guard. I tried to distract myself, called old friends, drowned in work, but nothing filled the silence, because it wasn't just about losing Rachel anymore. It was about realizing there had always been a better man in the house. He just happened to have 4 legs and a wagon tail. Weeks passed, and then one day I found myself driving by the old neighborhood. I didn't mean to stop, but I did. Parked across the street from her house. Lights on in the living room. Rachel curled up on the couch with a blanket, book in hand. And Milo, his head resting on her lap. She looked happy, not the kind of forced smile through the pain happy, the kind that comes after surviving the storm. Healed, whole, home, and I sat there, in Geneva, heart heavy, not because I wanted her back, but because I finally understood something something no apology could ever fix. I had mistaken presence for love. Milo never said a word. He didn't bring flowers, he didn't write poems or promises, but he stayed, he listened, he noticed. And in the quietest way, he loved her more than I ever did. I drove off without knocking, because that chapter was closed, not with anger, but with clarity. And sometimes when the nights feel too quiet, I picture them, Rachel humming in the kitchen, Milo following her like a shadow, the home I threw away, restored by loyalty I never respected. So yes, she chose the dog over me. And now, I finally understand why. ChatGPT said, Rõ làm luôn rồi. Can yêu tất cả những lưu ý bạn đã note. Mình giữ chắc trong từng câu chữ. Tập trung nội dung, đúng mạch riêng nhân vật chính là nữ. Đó là yếu tố trung tâm. Có phần bồi, cảm xúc sâu sắc, twist nhẹ. Mỗi phần hơn 1.000 từ, ngặt đoạn mượt mà, phù hợp chuyện giọng đọc AI. Rồi mình không tiếp tục siêu phẩm She Chose the Dog Over Me, and now I understand why. Về Part 3, what loyalty really looks like. Rachel didn't post much on social media. She never had. But I found myself checking her page more often now, just to see how she was doing. To see if Milo was still beside her. He always was. In every photo she allowed the world to see, Milo was there. Lying on the porch beside her feet, sitting beside her at the cafe, looking out the car window with his tongue lolling like pure joy. And Rachel? She looked brighter. Not because she'd replaced me, but because she'd rediscovered something I never truly gave her: peace. I used to roll my eyes whenever she talked to Milo like he understood her, but now I realized he did. Because loyalty doesn't need language. It shows up, it stays, it listens in the silence and speaks through presence. I started noticing dogs more. On the street, on the street, at the park, at work, how they looked at their owners, how they waited. There was something pure in that gaze. And I wondered, what if I had looked at Rachel the way Milo did? What if I had stayed with her through the quiet, through the fatigue, through the ache she never said out loud? Would she have needed Milo to hold her together? Would I still be the one beside her? I didn't know how to fix what I'd done, but I knew this. I had to become someone worthy of staying. So I went to the shelter. It was a small place near the edge of town, run by volunteers, overwhelmed, underfunded. I asked if they needed help. They gave me a mop and a name tag that read Jacob. Not husband, not traitor, just Jacob. I cleaned kennels, walked dogs, scraped dried food off old bowls, listened to barks and howls that echoed loneliness. And in those echoes, I heard myself. One day I met a dog named Charlie. He was older, half blind, terrified of men. He cowered when I entered his space, growled when I got too close, but I didn't flinch. I sat near the door of his kennel, every day, for 2 weeks. Didn't try to pet him, didn't talk too much, just sat. And one day he took a step toward me, then another, and finally laid his head on my knee. That moment felt like forgiveness, and I wept, right there on the shelter floor. I think that's when it clicked. This wasn't about Rachel anymore. It wasn't even about Milo. It was about learning what I'd never been taught: that love isn't proven by words or expensive dinners or hollow apologies. It's shown in the quiet, in the staying, in the choosing. Rachel hadn't needed a grand gesture. She needed someone who saw her when she was invisible, who stood by her when she wasn't easy to love. Milo had done that. I hadn't. Weeks passed. Then one evening, Sophie showed up at the shelter. I was walking Charlie when I saw her by the front desk. She looked surprised. "You're still here," she said. I nodded, unsure. She tilted her head. "You look different." I smiled faintly. "I am different." She didn't argue. Instead, she handed me a folded piece of paper. "Rachel asked me to give you this. She didn't want a text. She said you'd understand." I took it, my hand suddenly unsure again. Sophie paused before she turned to leave. "Don't read it for answers, Jen says," she said. "Read it for closure." Then she was gone. I sat outside with Charlie sleeping beside me and opened the letter. "Jacob, I never hated you, even when I should have. I loved you deeply, maybe too much, maybe enough to excuse the signs I didn't want to see. But when you left, it broke something in me that I didn't know could break. Milo didn't just stay, he saved me. He reminded me what love without conditions looked like, what home felt like, even in the middle of a storm. And when you came back begging, I didn't choose him over you out of spite. I chose him because he never made me beg for love, and I won't ever beg again. Rachel." I folded the letter slowly, felt something inside me settle. She wasn't angry. She wasn't waiting for revenge. She had just moved on. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do after someone breaks your heart is love yourself enough to not take them back. That night I stayed at the shelter late, watched Charlie breathe in his sleep. And for the first time since Rachel left, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt accountable and weirdly at peace, because now I knew what real loyalty looked like. And maybe someday I'd be ready to give it to someone else. Or maybe to a dog who needs a man who's finally learned how to stay. I didn't expect to see her again. Not in the shelter. Not on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. But there she was, Rachel, standing at the front desk, umbrella dripping rainwater onto the mat, Milo sitting calmly beside her. My breath caught before I even knew it was her. Because even after everything, my body still recognized her silhouette like it never forgot what home used to feel like. I stood frozen near the kennels, heart pounding against my ribs. She hadn't seen me yet. She was talking to the receptionist, soft voice, calm tone. She looked good. Not in the way that used to draw my attention across a room, but in the way someone looks when they're finally whole. Milo turned first. His eyes locked with mine, and to my shock, he didn't growl. He didn't look away. He just blinked once, calmly. As if to say, "I know you're different now." Rachel followed his gaze, and when her eyes met mine, she didn't flinch, didn't glare, didn't turn away. She just looked, quiet, measuring. Then she nodded. A small, respectful nod, like someone acknowledging the past but not inviting it back in. I walked over slowly, unsure what to say. Hi, I said. Hi, she replied. Silence stretched between us, filled with all the things we had once screamed and all the things we had never said at all. You work here now? She asked. I nodded. Almost 5 months. She smiled faintly, and Sophie told me. I glanced down at Milo. He sat between us, looking up at her with absolute peace, like he was proud of her, like he was protecting her still. I knelt down to his level. Hi, buddy, I whispered. He sniffed my hand, then nudged it gently. I swear it felt like grace. I didn't know you still brought him here, I said softly. I don't, she replied. Not usually, but he gets restless when we don't come. He likes to walk the yard, sit with the anxious dogs. I laughed quietly. Still the loyal therapist, huh? She smiled, Dad. Always. We sat on the bench in the front garden, Milo at our feet. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I didn't expect it, but she said something I'll never forget. You were right, I did choose him. But it was never really about choosing between you and the dog. It was about choosing peace, and you never brought me peace. Her words didn't cut me like they used to. They landed soft. Yeah, they landed soft. True, and I nodded. I know, I'd said, but I'm learning now. I've been learning every day. She looked at me. Good, she said. And that was it. No tearful reunion. No second chance. Just after a while, Milo got up and walked to the fence, tail wagging as he looked out at the horizon. Rachel followed him. She paused at the gate. I'm glad you're better, she said over her shoulder. Me too, I whispered. And then she was gone. I sat alone for a while. Let the quiet settle around me. Let the ache turn into something softer. Because for the first time since Rachel left, I did not feel like the man who got left behind. I felt like the man who finally understood why he had to be. That evening, I took Charlie, my shelter dog, for a walk. We passed by the park, the train station, the cafe Rachel once loved. He stopped, looked at the bench where Milo used to sit, then nudged my hand gently. And I realized I didn't need Rachel to love me again, because she already had. She'd loved me through disappointment, through betrayal, through silence. And then she loved herself enough to let me go. Now it was my turn. To love without needing to be chosen, to stay without being begged, to be the kind of man I wished I had been back then. For someone else. For Charlie. For me. I stood by the edge of the shelter yard that night, looking at the stars. Charlie leaned into my leg. I smiled and whispered, We're going to be okay, aren't we? He wagged his tail. Just once, and that was enough. It had been nearly a year since Rachel walked out of the shelter with Milo by her side. I never saw her again. No surprise texts, no late night calls, no sudden change of heart. Just silence. But it wasn't the cold, cruel kind. It was the kind of silence that follows a decision made with clarity. The kind that doesn't need closure because healing has already happened. And honestly, I respected it. Charlie and I kept living our quiet life. Morning walks, shelter days, evenings on the porch under a sky that always seemed to listen. Somehow I stopped needing the past to change. I was too focused on building something real now. But closure has a strange way of finding you when you least expect it. It came in the form of a small cardboard box, delivered to the shelter. No return address. Just my name. Inside were two things: a leather-bound notebook and a photo. I recognized it instantly. It was a picture of Rachel, sitting on the back porch of our old home, Milo in her lap. She wasn't looking at the camera. She was laughing. And in that moment, I remembered something. I had taken this picture years ago, before everything went wrong, back when we were still learning how to love each other. I turned it over. In small handwriting, I saw a single line. For the man I hoped you'd become, thank you for becoming him anyway. My throat tightened. I opened the notebook. It wasn't Rachel's journal. It was something else, something she had been working on maybe before she left. The first page. Notes for the life I want. Not a perfect one. Just one with peace, purpose, and a dog who understands me. Every page after that was filled with small dreams. Little thoughts, random lists, moments that mattered. Like, Milo sat by my side while I cried after Jacob left. I think he knows I'm not angry anymore, just tired. Today I made coffee and didn't feel broken. That feels like progress. If Jacob ever becomes someone different, I hope he finds someone who knows how to stay. By the last page, I was shaken. If this ever reaches him, please tell him I'm proud, not because he came back, but because he didn't give up becoming better. That's all I ever wanted for both of us. I don't know how she knew where to send it. Maybe Sophie helped. Maybe Rachel had kept tabs on me after all. Or maybe, like always, Milo just knew. But in that moment, with Charlie asleep beside me and the past quietly folded in my hands, I realized something. Rachel hadn't just left me, she had left something for me. A blueprint. A gentle, unwavering reminder that love isn't about holding on, it's about becoming someone worth holding on to. I framed the photo, put it by the door next to Charlie's leash. So every time we leave for a walk, I see it. And I remember the woman who once gave me everything and took nothing but her peace when she walked away. These days, people ask if I ever regret it. Losing Rachel, losing Milo, losing the life I once had. And my answer is always the same. I don't regret losing her. I regret not learning sooner how to deserve her. But thanks to a golden retriever, a second chance, and a woman brave enough to choose peace over pain, I finally learned. And maybe that's what healing really is, not getting back what you lost, but becoming the kind of person who can build something better next time. Charlie stirs beside me. I ruffle his fur. And for the first time, I don't need to look back anymore, because what she left behind was enough to carry me forward. It's been 2 years since Rachel left the shelter with Milo. Since she walked out of my life, not in anger, not in bitterness, but in a peace so complete it left no room for negotiation. And still, sometimes when the world gets quiet, when Charlie sighs in his sleep, when the light hits the porch just right, I write letters to her. Letters I never send, just like this one. Dear Rachel, it's strange to say, but I hope you never read this. Not because I don't want you to know, but because if you never need to hear it, it means you're doing okay. And that's all I've ever really wanted for you. I want you to know I kept going. I kept showing up at the shelter. Charlie's getting slower these days, but we still take our morning walks. The kids from the youth center, they still come every Saturday. And Charlie, he still picks out the ones who need love most. Just like Milo picked you, just like he protected you when I couldn't. And Rachel, I think I finally get it now. You weren't saving yourself from loneliness when you chose him. You were saving yourself from the version of me who didn't yet know how to love. And that was the bravest thing you ever did. I used to dream of fixing things, bringing flowers to your door, saying the right words. But now I don't dream of going back. I dream of becoming someone who never hurts like I used to, someone who listens more than he speaks, someone who stays. And maybe that's what you gave me without even meaning to, the blueprint for who I could become. I owe Milo for more than just your life. I owe him mine too. He turned heartbreak into purpose, into routine, into peace. Thank you for leaving, for not forgiving me too soon, for letting time do what apologies couldn't. I hope you still smile when the coffee brews in the morning. I hope Milo still wags his tail when the mail comes. I hope you still dance barefoot in the kitchen. And if you ever think of me, I hope it's not with regret, just a quiet knowing that we both became better people after the goodbye. Jacob, I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer I never opened, not because it doesn't matter, but because it's not meant to be answered. Some things are meant to be written, just to let go. That weekend, the shelter held an adoption fair. Dozens of dogs, so many people, laughter, barking, new beginnings. Charlie sat beside me, eyes half closed, soaking up the sun. A little girl walked by, holding her father's hand. She stopped when she saw us. Is he yours? She asked. I looked at Charlie, then smiled. No, I said, he's his own. I'm just lucky he lets me stay. She giggled, then ran and she giggled, then ran off. Charlie looked up at me. I patted his head. It was enough. Not a second chance. Not a do-over. Just a life worth showing up for. A life where love wasn't measured by possession, but by presence. Maybe one day I'll love again. Maybe not. But either way, I know how to stay now. I know how to listen. I know how to choose peace over pride. And it all started with a woman who walked away and a dog who never did. ChatGPT said, Toily and Loon. Kent you ơi, chúng ta cùng khép lại hành trình đầy cảm xúc, phản bội, hối hận, trưởng thành và chữa lành bằng một cái kết xứng đáng cho series She Chose the Dog Over Me, and now I understand why. Voy. Part 8, When the Next Dog Chose Me. I wasn't looking for another dog. Charlie was still here, old, wise, and enough to fill all the quiet spaces in my life. But grief, I've learned, doesn't wait for invitations. It shows up unannounced. And sometimes it shows up in the form of a dog who chooses you, long before you're ready. Her name was Luna, a trembling black and white mutt with one cloudy eye and a heart full of hesitation. She'd been found tied to a fence in the rain. No microchip, no name tag, no clue where she came from. The shelter staff said she was unadoptable. Too skittish, didn't trust anyone, refused food unless Charlie was in the room. That's how it started. Charlie would sit beside her crate, just breathing, just existing. And Luna would slowly, so slowly, come closer, one paw, then another, until one day she touched his shoulder with her nose and didn't flinch. That night, I found them curled together like they'd known each other for years. I sat beside them, unsure what to do with the lump in my throat, because I recognized that look in her eyes. The flinch, the freeze, the silent fear that love was something you had to survive first. She was me, a version of me I thought I'd buried. And just like Rachel once left me with a dog who knew how to stay, Charlie was leaving me with one too. Charlie passed away 2 weeks later. Peaceful, gentle, like he'd been waiting for Luna to settle before he let go. I buried him under the same willow where we used to sit together. Milo's photo, Rachel's notebook, Charlie's collar, they all rest on a shelf by my bed now. A shrine, say, maybe? Or a reminder that some souls come into our lives not to stay forever, but to teach us how to love the ones who will. Luna didn't eat for 2 days after Charlie died. She lay beside his empty bed, didn't cry, didn't bark, just waited. And then just waited. I knew that kind of grief. So I sat beside her, didn't speak, didn't push, just waited with her, like Charlie had done for me. On the third day, she nudged her food bowl toward me, a small gesture, but I felt it like thunder. And when I whispered, "We're gonna be okay, girl," she wagged her tail for the first time. Now it's just the two of us, Luna and me. She still flinches sometimes when the thunder rolls, still hides when strangers raise their voices, but she always comes back to me. And when she rests her head on my knee, I know what it means. It means she's chosen me. Not because I was the strongest or the kindest or the best, but because I showed up, because I stayed. One evening, while walking past the old train station, I stopped. Luna sat beside me watching the tracks. The same tracks Milo waited by. The same ones that once divide love and loss. I looked down at her. She looked up at me, and I smiled. "You don't have to wait, sweet girl. We're already home. I don't know where Rachel is now, but sometimes I wonder if she and Milo still walk the same trails, if she ever stops and smiles at the memory of the man she once loved and let go. If she knew that by choosing peace, she gave me something far more valuable than a second chance. She gave me a future. So yes, she chose the dog over me, and thank God she did, because that choice taught me how to be the kind of man a dog could trust. And that saved me.